The mining station Kepler 442b floated in the darkness between two dying stars, its hull scarred by decades of asteroid impacts and plasma burns. Commander Sarah Chen pressed her face against the observation deck's reinforced window, watching the evacuation ships disappear into the void. The Zephyrian Empire had given them 6 hours to abandon the facility before their war fleet arrived to claim the rare iridium deposits below. Most of the human workers had already left on the first wave of transports. Only a skeleton crew remained to ensure the reactor shutdown proceeded safely. Sarah's orders were clear: complete the evacuation, destroy sensitive equipment, and leave nothing useful for the enemy. The war between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire had raged for 3 years, and neither side showed mercy to captured assets. "Commander, we've got a problem in Sector 7, came the voice of Lieutenant Marcus Torres through her communicator. His tone carried an edge of concern that made Sarah's stomach tighten. She turned away from the window and jogged toward the maintenance tunnels that connected the station's outer rings. Her magnetic boots clicked against the metal flooring as artificial gravity fluctuated during the power-down sequence. Emergency lighting cast everything in an ominous red glow. "What kind of problem, Torres?" she asked, navigating through a narrow corridor lined with exposed cables and cooling pipes. "You need to see this yourself, ma'am. It's in the old storage bay near the mining equipment." Sarah found Torres standing outside a massive cargo hold that hadn't been used in months. The heavy blast doors were sealed, but she could hear something moving inside. It sounded like claws scraping against metal, followed by a low, mournful howl that sent chills down her spine. "How long has that been going on?" she asked. "Started about an hour ago. Rodriguez thought it might be equipment malfunction, but that's definitely organic." Torres ran his hand through his dark hair. "Commander, I think there's something alive in there." Sarah approached the door's control panel. According to the display, the bay had been sealed for 6 months. The environmental systems showed minimal atmosphere inside, barely enough to sustain most known life forms. Whatever was in there had to be incredibly hardy to survive those conditions. "Open it," she decided. "Ma'am, we don't know what's open it, Lieutenant. We can't leave a living creature to die when the Zephyrians arrive." Torres entered his access code reluctantly. The massive doors groaned apart, releasing a cloud of stale air that carried an alien scent, something wild and predatory, but also tinged with fear and desperation. What emerged from the shadows made both humans step backward. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall on powerful hind legs, its body covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb the red emergency lighting. Its head resembled a cross between a wolf and something more ancient and terrible. Brilliant yellow eyes reflected their flashlight beams, and rows of sharp teeth became visible when it opened its mouth to pant heavily. But it was the creature's condition that struck Sarah most forcefully. One of its front legs hung uselessly at its side, clearly broken and improperly healed. Deep scars crisscrossed its flanks, and patches of fur were missing where old burns had left permanent damage. A metal collar around its neck bore Zephyrian military markings. "That's a Shadowhound," Torres whispered. "I've seen them in intelligence briefings. The Zephyrians use them as living weapons." Sarah studied the alien war beast more carefully. Shadowhounds were legendary among human military forces, creatures bred for hunting and killing, capable of tracking prey across light years of space using senses humans couldn't comprehend. They were said to be utterly loyal to their Zephyrian masters and would fight to the death rather than surrender. Yet this one showed no aggression. It remained crouched in the doorway, watching them with those intelligent yellow eyes. Its breathing was labored, and Sarah could see that it was severely malnourished. The creature's ribs were visible beneath its matted fur. "It's injured," she observed. "And starving. Commander, we need to go. The last transport leaves in 90 minutes. Sarah ignored Torres and took a step toward the Shadowhound. The creature's ears flattened against its skull, but it didn't retreat or show its teeth. Instead, it made a sound somewhere between a whimper and a growl, a vocalization that somehow conveyed both warning and plea. "Easy there," Sarah said softly. "We're not going to hurt you." She noticed something else about the collar. The metal was partially melted and twisted, as if it had been damaged by extreme heat. Beneath the twisted metal, she could see raw, infected skin where the device had been pressing against the creature's neck for far too long. "Rodriguez," she called over her communicator. "Bring medical supplies to Sector 7. And see if we have any protein rations left." "Ma'am, what are you doing?" Torres asked nervously. Something probably stupid, Sarah admitted. But, I'm not leaving this thing to die. The Shadowhound tilted its massive head, studying Sarah with an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. Those yellow eyes held depths of understanding that reminded her uncomfortably of her own species. Whatever else these creatures might be, they were clearly more than simple animals. Rodriguez arrived carrying a medical kit and several emergency food packs. He stopped short when he saw the Shadowhound. Holy hell, Commander. I know what it is, Sarah said. Help me figure out how to help it. She opened one of the protein packs and placed it on the floor several feet away from the creature. The Shadowhound's nostrils flared as it caught the scent, but it remained motionless, watching her suspiciously. It doesn't trust us, Rodriguez observed. Can't blame it. Humans and Shadowhounds have been killing each other for years. Sarah considered this. The creature had obviously been abandoned here, probably left behind when its Zephyrian handlers evacuated ahead of some previous military action. It had survived alone in that storage bay for months, slowly starving and unable to escape because of its injuries. She reached into her own pack and pulled out her personal emergency rations, a chocolate energy bar that she'd been saving for the long journey to the next human settlement. Unwrapping it slowly, she took a small bite herself, then placed the rest on the floor. See? Not poisoned, she said, addressing the Shadowhound directly. The creature's ears perked up slightly. After a long moment, it limped forward on 3 legs and carefully sniffed the protein pack. Then, with surprising delicacy for such a large predator, it began to eat. Commander, the Zephyrian fleet will be here in 4 hours, Torres reminded her urgently. We need to finish the evacuation. Then, we take it with us. Both men stared at her. Ma'am, that's a Zephyrian war beast, Rodriguez said. It's probably been conditioned to kill humans on sight. Look at it, Sarah said. Really look. Does that seem like a killing machine to you? The Shadowhound had finished the protein pack and was now licking the wrapper with a long, dark tongue. When it caught them watching, it lowered itself to the floor in what was unmistakably a submissive posture, though its eyes never left Sarah's face. It's been abandoned and abused, she continued. Left to die in that storage bay. Whatever loyalty it might have had to the Zephyrians, I think they broke that when they left it behind. Torres checked his chronometer. Commander, even if you're right, how do we transport something that size? The remaining shuttles are already overloaded. Sarah was already working on that problem. The station had several emergency escape pods designed for situations exactly like this. They were Spartan affairs, just life support and basic propulsion, but they could reach the human fleet's rally point. We'll use Emergency Pod 4, she decided. Rodriguez, check its life support systems. Make sure they can handle non-human biology. You're serious about this, Torres said. It wasn't a question. Dead serious. This creature has suffered enough. While Rodriguez worked on the pod's environmental controls, Sarah slowly approached the Shadowhound. The alien war beast watched her with those unervingly intelligent eyes, but didn't move as she knelt down just outside what she guessed was its striking range. I know you can understand me, she said quietly. I don't know how much, but I can see the intelligence in your eyes. We're leaving this place. The people who hurt you are coming back, and they won't show mercy. You can come with us, or you can stay here and die. Your choice. The Shadowhound's head tilted as it processed her words. Then, slowly and, obviously painfully, it struggled to its feet. When it tried to put weight on its injured leg, it stumbled and nearly fell. Sarah reached out instinctively to steady the massive creature. Her hand touched its shoulder, and she felt the powerful muscles beneath the matted fur. The Shadowhound went perfectly still at the contact, every fiber of its being focused on her touch. Rodriguez, how are those medical supplies coming? She called. Got them, ma'am. But I don't know how much of this stuff will work on alien physiology. We'll figure it out. Right now, let's focus on that collar. It's infected and probably causing constant pain. She examined the twisted metal device more carefully. The collar was definitely Zephyrian military technology, probably some kind of control mechanism. Parts of it had been fused by what looked like plasma burns, and the electronics were clearly dead. Torres, get me a plasma cutter. We're going to remove this thing. Commander, if that collar is some kind of control device, removing it might what? Make it more dangerous? Look at this creature, Lieutenant. It's barely alive. That collar is killing it slowly. The Shadowhound remained perfectly still as Sarah worked with the plasma cutter. The tool made quick work of the damaged metal, but she had to be extremely careful not to burn the infected skin beneath. The creature never flinched or pulled away, even when the heat from the cutter must have been uncomfortable. When the collar finally fell away, the Shadowhound let out a long, shuddering breath that sounded almost like relief. The skin beneath was raw and infected, but Rodriguez immediately began treating it with antiseptic spray and healing gel. "Thank you," Sarah said softly, though she wasn't sure if the creature could understand the concept of gratitude. The Shadowhound's response surprised all of them. It lowered its massive head and gently pressed its forehead against Sarah's shoulder, a gesture that was unmistakably affectionate and grateful. "Well, I'll be damned," Torres muttered. "It actually does understand." The moment was interrupted by an urgent communication from the station's command center. "Commander Chen, we have incoming ships on long-range sensors. The Zephyrian fleet is ahead of schedule. We need to evacuate now." Sarah's blood ran cold. They had maybe 90 minutes before the enemy arrived, and the escape pods still needed to be prepared. "Rodriguez, is Pod 4 ready?" "Environmental systems are green. I've programmed the autopilot for the fleet rally point." "Good. Torres, help me get our new friend to the pod bay." Moving the injured Shadowhound proved easier than expected. Despite its size and obvious pain, the creature seemed to understand the urgency of their situation. It limped along beside Sarah, occasionally leaning against her for support when its injured leg gave out. The escape pod was cramped with 4 occupants, especially when one of them was an 8-foot-tall alien predator. But the Shadowhound curled up in the rear compartment without complaint, those yellow eyes watching Sarah intently. "All stations report ready for evacuation," came the final communication from the command center. "Initiating reactor scram in T-5 minutes." Sarah sealed the pod and initiated launch sequence. Through the small viewport, she watched as other escape pods and the final shuttles departed from the station. Within minutes, Kepler 442b was nothing but a distant speck of light in the darkness. "Think it will survive the journey?" Rodriguez asked, glancing back at the Shadowhound. "It survived this long," Sarah replied. "I think it's tougher than it looks." The alien creature had closed its eyes and seemed to be resting, but Sarah noticed that one ear remained tilted in her direction, still alert, still listening. Whatever bond had formed between them in those brief moments at the station, she had the feeling it was just the beginning. As their pod accelerated toward the human fleet's position, Sarah wondered what they would do with a Zephyrian war beast once they reached safety. The military would want to study it, interrogate it, probably dissect it to learn Zephyrian secrets. But, looking at the peaceful expression on the creature's alien features, Sarah made a silent promise. She had saved this being's life, and she would continue to protect it. The war between their species might rage on, but sometimes compassion could bridge even the deepest divides. Behind them, the mining station's reactor finally overloaded in a brilliant flash of light. The Zephyrians would find nothing but debris when they arrived. The real prize, Sarah reflected, was sleeping quietly in the back of their escape pod, a living reminder that enemies could become allies, and that mercy was often more powerful than weapons. The medical bay of the human battlecruiser Defiance buzzed with activity as Dr. Elena Vasquez examined her most unusual patient. The Shadowhound lay on a specially reinforced examination table, its yellow eyes tracking her every movement with wary intelligence. 3 days had passed since Commander Chen's rescue team had arrived at the fleet rally point, and the alien creature was still weak from months of starvation and neglect. "Remarkable bone density," Dr. Vasquez murmured as she studied the X-ray displays. "And look at these muscle fibers. No wonder they're such effective hunters." Sarah stood nearby, arms crossed, watching protectively as the ship's xenobiologist took detailed scans. She had barely left the medical bay since their arrival, much to the frustration of Fleet Admiral Morrison, who wanted her in debriefing sessions explaining why she had rescued an enemy war beast. "How's the leg healing?" Sarah asked. "Better than I expected. Whatever the Zephyrians used for bone strengthening treatments, it's helping the fracture knit together faster than normal. But the real damage is psychological." Dr. Vasquez highlighted areas on the brain scans. "See these neural pathways? They've been artificially altered. The Zephyrians did something to this creature's mind. The Shadowhound's ears twitched at the mention of its former masters. Its breathing quickened slightly, and Sarah noticed its claws extending involuntarily, an automatic stress response. What kind of alterations? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Conditioning. Pain response modification. They essentially rewired parts of its brain to create the perfect soldier. No fear, absolute obedience, enhanced aggression toward specific targets. Dr. Vasquez paused, her expression troubled. The collar you removed wasn't just a control device. It was delivering constant electrical impulses directly into the brainstem. Sarah felt sick. The torture the creature had endured was worse than she had imagined. Can it be reversed? Some of it, maybe. The brain is remarkably adaptable, especially in a species this intelligent. But it will take time and trust. A soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry to the medical bay. Sarah turned to see Admiral Morrison's aide, Lieutenant Colonel Barnes, waiting outside the containment field. Commander Chen, the Admiral wants to see you immediately. And he wants the specimen moved to the brig pending full analysis. The Shadowhound's head snapped up at the word brig, and a low growl rumbled from its throat. It struggled to rise from the examination table, favoring its injured leg. Absolutely not, Sarah said firmly. This creature is under my protection. Commander, with all due respect, that's not your decision. This is a potentially valuable intelligence asset, and Sarah stepped between Barnes and the Shadowhound. This is a sentient being that has been tortured and abandoned. I won't let you cage it like some kind of trophy. The confrontation was interrupted by an unexpected sound. The Shadowhound was making a series of low, rhythmic sounds that almost resembled speech. Dr. Vasquez quickly activated her translation software, but the computer couldn't interpret the alien vocalizations. What's it trying to say? Barnes asked nervously, his hand moving toward his sidearm. Sarah approached the examination table slowly. The Shadowhound's yellow eyes fixed on hers, and she saw something there that made her heart race desperation, but also trust. It was trying to communicate something important. I think it's asking for help, she said quietly. The creature continued its vocalizations, occasionally gesturing with its good front leg toward the display screens showing its brain scans. Dr. Vasquez watched in fascination as patterns emerged in the creature's attempts at communication. It's pointing to specific areas of its own brain, the doctor observed. Areas that show the most artificial modification. I think it wants us to understand what was done to it. Admiral Morrison himself arrived before Barnes could respond. The grizzled fleet commander filled the doorway with his presence, his weathered face stern as he surveyed the scene. He had fought the Zephyrians for 3 years and had little patience for what he saw as misplaced sympathy. Commander Chen, explain to me why we have a Zephyrian war beast in our medical bay instead of our interrogation cells. Sir, this creature was abandoned and tortured by its own handlers. It's not a threat. Not a threat? Morrison gestured at the Shadowhound's impressive fangs and claws. That thing was bred to hunt and kill humans. The fact that it's currently docile doesn't change its nature. The Shadowhound seemed to understand the hostile tone, if not the words. It lowered itself flat against the examination table, assuming the same submissive posture Sarah had seen at the mining station. But its eyes never left Morrison's face. With respect, sir, its nature is exactly what we need to understand, Dr. Vasquez interjected. The neural modifications are incredibly sophisticated. If we can reverse them, we might learn how to help other conditioned creatures. And the medical data could revolutionize our understanding of alien neurology. Morrison's expression remained skeptical. And if it reverts to its original programming? If it decides to tear out someone's throat? Then, I'll take full responsibility, Sarah said firmly. Before Morrison could respond, the ship's communication system activated. Admiral Morrison to the bridge immediately. We have incoming distress signals from the Kepler system. Morrison's eyes narrowed. The system we just evacuated? Sir, it's not from our people. The signals are Zephyrian. Morrison turned on his heel and headed for the bridge, pausing only to point at Sarah. Commander, you have 12 hours to prove that creature is worth the risk. If it shows any signs of aggression, it goes into containment. As soon as Morrison left, the tension in the medical bay decreased noticeably. The Shadowhound's breathing slowed, and it cautiously raised its head from the table. 12 hours, Dr. Vasquez said thoughtfully. We need to make them count. Sarah moved closer to the examination table. The creature's yellow eyes tracked her approach, but she could see curiosity there now, rather than fear. Can you understand me? She asked softly. The Shadowhound tilted its massive head and made a sound that was almost like a question, a rising inflection that seemed to mirror her own speech pattern. I think that's a yes, Dr. Vasquez said excitedly. Try asking something else. Are you in pain? This time the creature's response was clearer, a low, mournful sound accompanied by a slight nod of its head. Where does it hurt? The Shadowhound carefully lifted its injured leg, then touched its head with one claw, indicating the sites of its greatest discomfort. Dr. Vasquez was recording everything. The learning curve is incredible. It's picking up human communication patterns in real time. That's not learning, Sarah realized suddenly. It already knew some human speech. The Zephyrians would have needed their warbeasts to understand basic commands from prisoners or captured soldiers. She had a sudden idea. Moving to Dr. Vasquez's workstation, she pulled up files on Zephyrian military structure. Computer, display standard Zephyrian military commands. A series of alien words appeared on the screen, along with their phonetic pronunciation. Sarah tried a few, watching the Shadowhound's reaction carefully. When she pronounced what the computer indicated meant attention, the creature immediately sat up straighter, its ears snapping to attention. When she said the word for rest, it relaxed visibly. It definitely understands Zephyrian commands, Sarah confirmed. But, watch this. She switched to simple English. Lie down. The Shadowhound hesitated for a moment, then carefully lowered itself to the examination table. Good, Sarah said, using the same tone she might use with a cooperative patient. The creature's tail actually moved slightly, not quite a wag, but definitely a positive response. Incredible, Dr. Vasquez breathed. It's choosing to obey human commands over its conditioning. That suggests a level of conscious decision-making that's, well, it's practically human-level intelligence. Their progress was interrupted by another chime from the communication system. This time it was Lieutenant Torres requesting permission to enter. Commander, you need to hear this. We've decoded some of those Zephyrian distress signals. Sarah gestured him in. Torres looked nervous as he approached the examination table, but the Shadowhound merely watched him with passive curiosity. What did you find? Sarah asked. The signals are from a damaged Zephyrian transport. They're requesting immediate medical assistance for their crew. Torres paused, glancing at the Shadowhound. But, here's the interesting part, they're not just asking for help with personnel. They're specifically requesting veterinary support for injured warbeasts. The Shadowhound's reaction was immediate and dramatic. It began making urgent vocalizations, struggling to rise from the table despite its injuries. Its yellow eyes were wide with what looked like hope and desperation. It recognizes something, Sarah realized. Other Shadowhounds. It thinks there might be others like it on that ship. Dr. Vasquez checked her medical scanner. Its stress levels are through the roof, but not from fear. This looks like concern for others. Torres looked skeptical. Commander, you're reading a lot into some growls and whimpers. But Sarah was studying the creature's body language. Everything about its posture suggested urgency and pleading. It was trying to tell them something important. Computer, display the location of that distress signal. A star chart appeared, showing their current position and the source of the Zephyrian transmissions. The damaged transport was drifting in space roughly 6 hours away at maximum speed. Zephyrians don't ask humans for help. Maybe not, Sarah mused. But what if they're desperate enough? What if they have injured creatures aboard that they can't treat? The Shadowhound was watching the star chart intently, its ears forward with obvious interest. When Sarah highlighted the signal source, it made a sound that was unmistakably affirmative. It wants us to help, she said with growing conviction. Commander, even if that's true, Admiral Morrison will never authorize a rescue mission for Zephyrian forces. Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. The Shadowhound continued to watch her expectantly, as if it could sense that she was considering options. What if it's not a rescue mission, she finally said. What if it's an intelligence-gathering opportunity? Think about it, a chance to board a Zephyrian vessel, access their medical data, maybe even rescue more of these creatures? Dr. Vasquez nodded slowly. The medical intelligence alone would be invaluable. And if there are more Shadowhounds in conditions like this one was. Torres still looked doubtful, but Sarah could see him considering the possibilities. The creature seemed to sense the shift in mood and made a soft sound that somehow conveyed both hope and gratitude. I'll talk to Morrison, Sarah decided. But first, let's see what else our friend here can tell us about Zephyrian ships and their crew. She turned back to the Shadowhound. You want to help them, don't you? The others like you? The creature's response was immediate and unmistakable, a sound of agreement that needed no translation. Then, help us understand. Show us how to find them. What happened next surprised everyone. The Shadowhound struggled to its feet and moved to Dr. Vasquez's workstation. With careful precision, it used one claw to point at specific areas of the star chart, then made a series of vocalizations while gesturing at the medical equipment. It's giving us tactical information, Torres realized with amazement. Layout of Zephyrian medical facilities, maybe locations of holding areas for creatures like itself. Sarah felt a surge of excitement. This wasn't just about helping one abandoned creature anymore. It was about understanding an entire species that had been bred for war, and possibly finding a way to save others who were suffering under Zephyrian control. Computer, record everything, she ordered. We're going to need detailed intelligence if we're going to convince Morrison to authorize this mission. The Shadowhound continued its impromptu briefing, using a combination of sounds, gestures, and positioning to convey complex information about Zephyrian ship design and crew behavior. Its yellow eyes shone with determination and something that looked remarkably like hope. Sarah found herself smiling for the first time since the rescue. Maybe, just maybe, they were about to turn one small act of compassion into something much larger, a chance to show that even in the middle of a brutal interstellar war, mercy could achieve what weapons could not. Admiral Morrison stood at the center of the Defiance's command bridge, studying the tactical display with deep concentration. The damaged Zephyrian transport appeared as a slowly rotating icon on the main screen, its distress signals growing weaker with each passing hour. Around him, his senior officers debated the wisdom of responding to their enemy's plea for help. It could be an elaborate trap, warned Colonel Hayes, the ship's intelligence officer. The Zephyrians have used false distress calls before. But, never requesting medical aid for their war beasts, Commander Chen countered from her position beside the tactical station. And, our friend in the medical bay has given us detailed intelligence about their ship configuration. If it's a trap, it's incredibly sophisticated. Morrison turned to study Sarah's face. In his 30 years of military service, he had learned to recognize officers who had conviction beyond the call of duty. Shen had that look now, the same expression he had seen on faces before crucial battles that changed the course of wars. Show me what the creature told you, he ordered. Sarah activated the holographic display that she and Dr. Vasquez had assembled from the Shadowhound's intelligence briefing. A three-dimensional schematic of a Zephyrian medical transport appeared, complete with detailed annotations. These are the locations of medical facilities, Sarah explained, highlighting different sections in blue. And these red areas are where injured war beasts would be kept. According to our source, the creatures are held in specialized containment units that maintain their life functions but keep them sedated. Our source, Morrison repeated dryly. You mean the same war beast that was programmed to kill humans? Sir, respectfully, that creature chose to help us despite its conditioning. It's providing intelligence that could save lives, both human and Shadowhound. Chief Medical Officer Vasquez stepped forward. Admiral, the neural conditioning we discovered is a form of torture that violates every principle of sentient rights. If there are more creatures suffering under that kind of treatment, we have a moral obligation to act. Morrison studied the ship schematic more carefully. The intelligence was incredibly detailed, showing not just the basic layout but security measures, crew quarters, and even the locations of emergency systems. It was either the most sophisticated deception in military history, or genuine inside information from someone who had lived aboard such vessels. What's the crew complement on a ship like this, he asked. 12 to 15 Zephyrians, plus medical staff, Sarah replied. But, the distress signals indicate their life support is failing. They may have casualties. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes spoke up from the communications station. Sir, we're receiving new transmissions. The transport is reporting multiple crew members down, and their medical systems are completely offline. Morrison weighed his options. The war with the Zephyrians had been brutal and unforgiving. Neither side had shown mercy to the other in 3 years of conflict. But something about this situation felt different. "Time to intercept?" he asked. 4 hours at maximum burn, replied Navigation Officer Patel. "Sir," Colonel Hayes interjected, "even if this isn't a trap, boarding a Zephyrian vessel is extremely dangerous. Their war beasts will attack any human on sight." "Not necessarily," Sarah said. "Our Shadowhound has indicated it can communicate with others of its species. It wants to come with us." Morrison's eyebrows shot up. "You want to take a war beast on a boarding operation?" "I want to take a translator and guide who understands both their technology and their psychology." Dr. Vasquez nodded in agreement. "The creature has shown remarkable intelligence and emotional complexity. If there are others in distress on that ship, having it along could make the difference between a rescue operation and a firefight." Morrison was quiet for several minutes, studying the tactical display and considering the risks. The smart military decision was to ignore the distress call and continue with their planned operations. But sometimes the smart decision wasn't the right one. "Chen, can your creature handle the stress of a combat operation with its injuries?" "Dr. Vasquez has cleared it for limited activity. The leg is healing, and its other injuries are mostly superficial." "What about psychological stress? If it sees Zephyrian crew members, will it revert to its original conditioning?" Sarah hesitated. That was the unknown factor in all of this. Despite the creature's apparent friendliness toward humans, it had been programmed as a weapon for years. "Unknown, sir. But it's expressed clear concern for other Shadowhounds. I believe its desire to help them will override any remaining conditioning." Morrison made his decision. "Colonel Hayes, prep a boarding party. Light arms only, we're going in as rescuers, not conquerors. Dr. Vasquez, I want you along to assess any medical needs. Chen, you and your creature will accompany the team as consultants." "Sir," Hayes protested, "regulations prohibit bringing alien species on boarding operations." "Then, it's a good thing I'm the one who writes the regulations on this ship," Morrison replied grimly. "Helm, set course for the transport. Maximum burn." 2 hours later, Sarah found herself in the shuttle bay, checking equipment alongside the boarding party. The Shadowhound stood nearby, fitted with a specially designed harness that could support its weight if its injured leg gave out. Dr. Vasquez had also attached monitoring devices to track its vital signs during the operation. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked the creature softly. The Shadowhound's response had become familiar over the past few days, a low, rumbling sound that somehow conveyed both determination and anxiety. It understood they were going to help its own kind, but it was clearly nervous about returning to a Zephyrian vessel. Lieutenant Torres finished his equipment check and approached them. "Commander, are we sure about this? Once we're aboard that ship, we'll be completely dependent on that thing's cooperation." "Its name is Shadow," Sarah said firmly. She had started using the name that morning, and the creature had responded positively to it. "And, yes, I'm sure." Colonel Hayes gathered the boarding party around the tactical display. Intelligence indicates the transport has 3 main sections: forward crew quarters, central medical bay, and aft cargo holds where the war beasts are kept. "Our priorities are crew casualties first, then assessment of the creature's condition." Shadow made a sound and pointed to specific areas of the display. Sarah translated based on their growing understanding of the creature's communication style. "It says the medical bay will be heavily automated. Most of the life support for the Shadowhounds runs from there. If that system is failing, the creatures could be dying." "How does it know the medical systems are automated?" Hayes asked suspiciously. Shadow began a series of vocalizations and gestures, and Sarah found herself understanding more than she expected. The creature's intelligence seemed to be adapting rapidly to human communication patterns. "It says all Zephyrian medical ships use the same basic design. It's been aboard vessels like this many times." Sarah paused as Shadow continued. "It also says the crew will be wearing environmental suits because their life support is compromised." Dr. Vasquez looked up from her medical kit. "That actually matches the distress transmissions. They reported atmospheric contamination in addition to life support failure. The shuttle pilot announced departure clearance, and the boarding party strapped in for the short journey to the transport. Shadow had some difficulty with the human design restraints, but Torres helped secure the harness properly. As they approached the damaged Zephyrian vessel, Sarah got her first good look at their destination. The transport was larger than she had expected, roughly the size of a human frigate but, with the flowing, organic lines typical of Zephyrian design. Damage was evident along its hull. What looked like the results of an asteroid impact had torn through multiple sections. Life signs are minimal, reported the shuttle's sensors. I'm reading 8 Zephyrian life forms, all in the forward section. No movement in the aft cargo areas. Shadow made an urgent sound and gestured toward the rear of the transport. Its distress was obvious even to the human crew members. It's worried about the other creatures, Sarah translated. If there's no movement in the cargo area, they could be unconscious or worse. The shuttle docked with the transport's emergency airlock, and Hayes led the boarding party through the connection tunnel. The Zephyrian ship's atmosphere was breathable but stale, with an underlying chemical smell that suggested extensive system failures. Shadow immediately began sniffing the air, its enhanced senses picking up information invisible to human instruments. It made a series of urgent sounds and gestured down the main corridor. This way, Sarah interpreted. It can smell other shadow hounds. They moved through the ship in tactical formation, with Hayes and his soldiers maintaining security while Dr. Vasquez monitored atmospheric conditions. The ship's interior was dimly lit by emergency lighting, and several sections showed obvious damage from the asteroid impact. They found the first Zephyrian crew members in what appeared to be the ship's command center. 3 aliens wearing environmental suits were unconscious at their stations, their breathing apparatus indicating severe respiratory distress. Dr. Vasquez immediately began medical assessments while Hayes searched for additional survivors. Shadow showed little interest in the Zephyrian crew. Its attention was focused entirely on the rear sections of the ship, where according to their intelligence, the war beasts were kept. "Commander, we need to move to the medical bay," Shadow's body language seemed to say. Its agitation was increasing with every minute they spent in the forward section. "Hayes, the creature is right. If there are shadowhounds dying in the cargo area, we need to reach them quickly." The colonel nodded and gestured for the team to advance deeper into the ship. The corridor leading to the medical section showed more severe damage, with several areas sealed by emergency bulkheads. When they reached the medical bay, Shadow's reaction was immediate and intense. It began making loud, urgent vocalizations and pressed against the sealed doors leading to the cargo holds. Dr. Vasquez scanned the door controls. The containment systems are still active, but they're running on emergency power. If that fails, whatever's behind these doors won't have life support. Hayes examined the Zephyrian control panel. "I can't read any of this. How do we open it?" Shadow approached the controls and began manipulating them with surprising dexterity. Its claws, which seemed designed only for combat, proved capable of delicate work with alien technology. Within moments, the doors began to slide open. What they saw beyond made everyone stop in shock. The cargo hold contained dozens of individual containment units, each one holding a different creature. Most were shadowhounds like their guide, but there were other species as well, some Sarah didn't recognize. And almost all of them appeared to be unconscious or dying. "Medical emergency," Dr. Vasquez announced, rushing toward the nearest containment units. "Life support is failing across the entire hold." Shadow moved among the units, examining each one carefully. Its vocalizations took on a mournful quality as it identified creatures that were clearly beyond help. But, for those that were still alive, it began working frantically to adjust their life support systems. It knows how to operate their equipment, Sarah realized. It's trying to save them. Torres was recording everything with his tactical scanner. "Commander, there must be 40 or 50 creatures in here. How do we transport them all?" Before Sarah could answer, Shadow made an urgent sound and gestured toward one particular unit near the center of the hold. Inside was another shadowhound, smaller than their guide but with similar coloring. This one was conscious and watching their approach with those same intelligent yellow eyes. Shadow pressed its face against the containment unit's transparent wall and began making soft, complex vocalizations. The creature inside responded immediately, its own sounds somehow conveying both relief and desperation. "They know each other," Sarah said with sudden understanding. They're communicating. Dr. Vasquez was examining the containment unit's controls. Life support is critical but stable. I can activate the release mechanism, but I don't know what will happen when it opens. Shadow looked at Sarah and made a sound that was clearly a request. It wanted them to free the other creature. Do it, Sarah decided. As the containment unit opened, the smaller Shadowhound stumbled forward on unsteady legs. It was obviously weak and malnourished, but its first action was to touch noses with their guide in what was unmistakably an affectionate greeting. Shadow began making urgent sounds and gesturing around the cargo hold. It was clear what it wanted: to free all the surviving creatures. Hayes, can we do this? Sarah asked. Can we transport this many aliens? The colonel was studying his tactical display. It'll be tight, but the Defiance has cargo bays that could be converted to temporary holding areas. The question is whether Admiral Morrison will authorize it. Shadow seemed to understand their discussion. It moved to Dr. Vasquez's mobile scanner and began indicating specific creatures in different containment units. Its gestures were becoming more sophisticated, clearly trying to convey priority information. I think it's triaging, Dr. Vasquez realized. Telling us which ones are in the most critical condition. Sarah activated her communicator. Admiral Morrison, this is Commander Chen. We've found them, sir. And we're going to need a lot more space than we planned. The response was immediate. How many are we talking about, Commander? Shadow had finished its assessment and was holding up claws to indicate numbers. Sarah did a quick count of the creatures it had indicated as savable. 37 survivors, sir. All in various stages of medical crisis. There was a long pause before Morrison responded. Chen, do you understand what you're asking me to do? To bring 36 alien war beasts aboard my ship? Sarah looked around the cargo hold, at the dying creatures, at Shadow working frantically to keep them alive, at the smaller Shadowhound that was already showing signs of recovery now that it was free from its containment unit. Sir, I'm asking you to save 37 lives. What they were before doesn't matter. What matters is what they could become. Shadow looked up at her and made a sound that needed no translation. It was saying thank you not just for itself, but for all the others who finally had a chance to be free. The cargo bay of the Defiance had been transformed into an emergency medical facility unlike anything the ship had ever hosted. 37 alien creatures of various species lay in makeshift recovery areas, attended by every medical officer in the fleet. The air hummed with activity as human doctors worked alongside their new Shadowhound assistants to save lives that had never been meant to matter. Dr. Vasquez moved between the recovery stations, monitoring vital signs and adjusting treatment protocols. 3 days had passed since the rescue, and the results exceeded her most optimistic projections. Only 2 creatures had been too far gone to save, while the rest showed remarkable improvement under proper medical care. The healing rates are incredible, she told Commander Chen as they paused beside a recovery unit containing a species none of them recognized, something resembling a cross between a cat and a lizard, with scales that shimmered in multiple colors. Whatever genetic modifications the Zephyrians made, they included accelerated healing factors. Sarah watched as Shadow moved among the recovering creatures, offering comfort and communication that human medicine couldn't provide. The large Shadowhound had appointed itself as unofficial translator and counselor, helping the medical staff understand each species' specific needs. How many different types are we dealing with? Sarah asked. 17 distinct species, as far as we can tell. Shadow has been invaluable in helping us understand their biology. Dr. Vasquez gestured toward a section where several smaller creatures were resting. Those are whisper cats, apparently used for stealth reconnaissance. And those larger ones near the back are siegebreakers, bred for demolition work. Each species showed the same signs they had first seen in Shadow: evidence of neural conditioning, malnutrition from inadequate care, and injuries that suggested they had been treated as disposable assets rather than living beings. Admiral Morrison appeared at the entrance to the makeshift medical bay, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the organized chaos. Several junior officers accompanied him, including representatives from Fleet Intelligence who had been studying the rescued creatures for potential military applications. Doctor, what's your overall assessment? Morrison asked. Remarkable progress, sir. The creatures are responding well to treatment, both physical and psychological. More importantly, they're showing signs of rapid adaptation to human interaction. Morrison's attention focused on Shadow, who was currently helping a pair of smaller creatures learn to eat solid food after months of intravenous nutrition. The large Shadowhound moved with gentle patience, its earlier aggression replaced entirely by nurturing behavior. Commander Chen, I've been reviewing your reports. You believe these creatures can be rehabilitated? I believe they already are being rehabilitated, sir. Shadow has shown us that the conditioning can be overcome with proper care and respect. Intelligence Officer Captain Wells stepped forward. Admiral, with respect, we're missing an incredible opportunity here. These creatures possess military capabilities that could give us a significant advantage against the Zephyrians. Shadow's head turned sharply toward Wells, and a low growl rumbled from its throat. The other creatures in the medical bay immediately became alert, sensing tension in their informal leader. Sarah moved quickly to Shadow's side. Easy, she said softly. Nobody's going to use you as a weapon anymore. The Shadowhound's posture relaxed slightly, but its yellow eyes remained fixed on Captain Wells with obvious suspicion. You see? Wells continued. They still have their combat instincts intact. With proper training, we could turn them into assets against their former masters. Captain Wells, Morrison said quietly, I suggest you lower your voice. I don't think our guests appreciate being discussed like military equipment. Dr. Vasquez had been monitoring Shadow's vital signs during the exchange. Actually, Admiral, this raises an important point. The creatures are showing signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. Discussions of military applications trigger immediate anxiety responses. To demonstrate her point, she activated a recording of Zephyrian military commands. The effect on the recovering creatures was immediate and dramatic. Several began showing signs of distress, while others assumed defensive postures despite their injuries. Shadow moved quickly among them, making soothing sounds and gentle physical contact. Within minutes, the anxiety levels decreased, but the demonstration had made its point clear. They've been traumatized by their military service, Sarah observed. Forcing them back into combat roles would be another form of abuse. Captain Wells looked frustrated. Commander, these creatures were designed for warfare. It's their primary function. No, Sarah replied firmly. Their primary function is to be living, thinking beings. The warfare capability was forced on them. Morrison watched the interaction between Shadow and the other creatures with growing interest. The large Shadowhound had clearly established itself as a leader, but its leadership style was protective rather than aggressive. Dr. Vasquez, what would these creatures need for long-term care? Space, proper nutrition, and, most importantly, purpose. They're all highly intelligent species that need mental stimulation and meaningful activity. Shadow approached them, moving with the careful gait that favored its healing leg. It made a series of sounds to Sarah, who had become increasingly fluent in interpreting the creature's communication attempts. It wants to show us something, Sarah translated. Shadow led them to a section of the medical bay where several of the smaller creatures were working together on what appeared to be a complex puzzle made from spare parts. Dr. Vasquez had given them the components to keep them mentally active, but they had assembled them into something entirely unexpected, a three-dimensional model of the Defiance's engine core. How did they know what our engines look like? Morrison asked in amazement. Shadow made explanatory sounds while pointing to various parts of the model. Its gestures indicated that the creatures had been observing and listening to ship operations, learning about human technology through careful attention to details their handlers had never noticed. They've been studying us, Sarah realized. Learning our technology, our language, our behavior patterns. Not as weapons, but as curious, intelligent beings. Dr. Vasquez scanned the engine model with her medical tricorder. The accuracy is incredible. They've recreated details that most of our own engineers would need blueprints to remember. One of the smaller creatures, a species they had dubbed Tinkers due to their obvious mechanical aptitude, approached Morrison directly. It was barely 3 feet tall, with 6 delicate arms and large, expressive eyes. Despite its diminutive size, it moved with confidence as it offered Admiral Morrison a small device it had constructed from medical equipment components. Morrison accepted the device carefully. When he activated it, it projected a holographic image of the damaged Zephyrian transport they had rescued the creatures from, complete with detailed structural analysis showing where the asteroid impact had caused the most critical damage. It's a damage assessment report, Morrison said with amazement. More detailed than anything our engineers produced. Shadow made approving sounds and gestured to several other creatures who had been working on similar projects. It was clear that the creatures had been collaborating to understand and document their rescue, analyzing both Zephyrian and human technology in the process. Captain Wells looked stunned. If they can produce intelligence analysis of this quality, they could revolutionize our understanding of Zephyrian technology, Morrison finished. Not as weapons, but as consultants and analysts. Sarah felt a surge of excitement. This was the breakthrough they needed, a way for the creatures to contribute meaningfully to the human war effort without being forced back into combat roles. Shadow, she said directly to the large shadow hound, would your people be willing to help us understand Zephyrian technology? Not to fight, but to defend ourselves better? Shadow's response was immediate and enthusiastic. It made a series of sounds that clearly indicated agreement, then moved among the other creatures, apparently explaining the concept. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Dr. Vasquez was recording everything. This changes everything. Instead of trying to turn them back into weapons, we're offering them a chance to be teachers and advisors. Morrison nodded slowly. Commander Chen, I want you to develop a formal proposal for integrating these creatures into our technical staff. Not as soldiers, but as civilian consultants with full protection under our non-combatant policies. Sir, that's unprecedented, Captain Wells protested. Granting civilian status to alien species during wartime is exactly the kind of precedent that could help end this war, Morrison interrupted. If we can demonstrate that former enemy assets can be successfully rehabilitated and integrated, it opens possibilities for negotiation that don't currently exist. Shadow approached Morrison and made a sound that the Admiral was beginning to recognize as a question. Through Sarah's translation, it was asking about the other Zephyrian crew members they had rescued from the transport. The Zephyrian survivors are recovering in our secure medical facility, Morrison explained. They're being treated according to the Geneva Convention for Prisoners of War. Shadow made additional sounds, and Sarah found herself understanding concepts that the creature was expressing with increasing sophistication. It wants to know if they could communicate with the Zephyrian prisoners. Not interrogation, but translation services? Morrison's eyebrows rose. The creatures want to serve as interpreters? Shadow nodded emphatically and gestured to several other creatures who had gathered around them. It was clear that this was something they had discussed among themselves. They understand both sides now, Sarah realized. Both Zephyrian and human perspectives. They could bridge the communication gap in ways we never considered possible. Dr. Vasquez was monitoring the creature's stress levels during this conversation. No anxiety responses. They genuinely want to help facilitate communication. Morrison made his decision. Set up a controlled meeting. Shadow and one other volunteer, with full security protocols and medical monitoring. Let's see if they can establish meaningful dialogue with the prisoners. As the Admiral left to make arrangements, Sarah remained with Shadow and the other recovering creatures. The transformation over the past few days had been remarkable, from traumatized warbeasts to curious, helpful beings eager to contribute to peaceful solutions. Shadow moved close to Sarah and made a sound that had become familiar over their time together. It was a sound of gratitude, but also something deeper. Trust, perhaps, or even affection. You're welcome, she said softly, scratching behind the creature's ears in a gesture that seemed to transcend species barriers. All of you are welcome here. Looking around the improvised medical bay, watching humans and aliens working together to heal and learn from each other, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since the war began, hope that this conflict might end not in victory or defeat, but in understanding. Shadow made one more sound, and this time Sarah understood it perfectly. It wasn't a word in any language, but a concept that needed no translation: family. These creatures had found something with the humans that their Zephyrian masters had never provided: acceptance for who they were rather than what they could do. And, perhaps, Sarah thought, that acceptance would prove more powerful than any weapon either side had yet deployed. 6 months after the rescue, the former cargo bay of the Defiance had been permanently converted into the Interspecies Communication Center, the first facility of its kind in human space. Shadow stood at the central console, its injured leg now fully healed, coordinating translation services for the most important diplomatic meeting in galactic history. Representatives from 12 human colonies sat across from a delegation of Zephyrian officials, with Shadow and its fellow creatures serving as both translators and living proof that the two species could coexist peacefully. The peace talks had been ongoing for 3 weeks, with breakthrough moments and frustrating setbacks in equal measure. Commander Sarah Chen, now bearing the rank of captain after her promotion for pioneering interspecies relations, watched from the observation gallery as Shadow facilitated a complex discussion about territorial boundaries. The large Shadowhound had developed an almost supernatural ability to convey not just words, but emotional context and cultural nuance between species that had been killing each other for years. Remarkable progress, observed Dr. Vasquez, now heading the Federation's first department of xenobiological psychology. Shadow's translation accuracy has improved by 30% since last month. Sarah nodded, though her attention was focused on the Zephyrian delegation leader, High Commander Vextar. The scarred veteran had initially refused to participate in negotiations that included corrupted war beasts, but Shadow's patient diplomacy had gradually earned even his grudging respect. The territorial dispute over the Kepler system remains contentious, Sarah noted. Both sides have valid claims. But notice how Shadow is handling it, Dr. Vasquez pointed out. It's not just translating positions, it's helping each side understand the underlying concerns. Indeed, Shadow was using a combination of vocalizations, gesture, and holographic displays to explain human concerns about resource security alongside Zephyrian cultural attachments to ancestral hunting grounds. Several smaller creatures worked alongside, providing technical analysis and historical context that neither side's diplomats had considered. The breakthrough came when one of the Tinkers, the small mechanical specialists, presented a three-dimensional model showing how the disputed system could be developed cooperatively. The design integrated human mining efficiency with Zephyrian environmental preservation techniques, creating something neither species could have achieved alone. High Commander Vextar studied the model with obvious interest. When he spoke, his words were translated by Shadow with careful attention to emotional undertones. He says the proposal has merit, but he questions whether humans can be trusted to honor environmental protections, Sarah interpreted from Shadow's translation. Admiral Morrison, now serving as chief human negotiator, leaned forward. Ask him what guarantees would satisfy his concerns. Shadow's response process had become fascinating to observe. The creature would listen to the human statement, process not just the words but Morrison's tone and body language, then convey both the literal meaning and the emotional context to the Zephyrian delegation. The reverse process was equally sophisticated. He suggests a joint monitoring force, Sarah translated as Shadow completed the exchange. Zephyrian environmental specialists working alongside human engineers, with oversight from neutral parties. Neutral parties? Morrison asked. Who would qualify as neutral in a human-Zephyrian dispute? Shadow made a sound that had become familiar to everyone in the room, something that conveyed both amusement and pride. It gestured to itself and the other creatures working around the communication center. The creatures volunteer themselves as neutral monitors, Dr. Vasquez said with amazement. They understand both species better than either understands the other. The suggestion caused intense discussion on both sides of the table. For humans, the idea of alien creatures serving as arbitrators was unprecedented. For Zephyrians, the concept of their former war beasts holding positions of authority was almost incomprehensible. But Shadow was persistent. It began displaying holographic evidence of the successful cooperation aboard the Defiance over the past 6 months. Technical innovations developed jointly by humans and rescued creatures. Medical breakthroughs achieved by combining human and Zephyrian biological knowledge. Cultural exchanges that had enriched both communities. One particularly compelling display showed the work being done in the ship's new education center, where young human officers learned alongside newly hatched creatures in an unprecedented interspecies academy. The footage showed a human cadet and a young Shadowhound working together to solve complex engineering problems, their different cognitive approaches complementing each other perfectly. This is the future we're proposing, Shadow's translations conveyed. Not human dominance or Zephyrian superiority, but genuine partnership. High Commander Vextar was quiet for several minutes, studying the displays with an expression that was difficult to read even for Shadow's enhanced translation abilities. Finally, he spoke directly to the large Shadowhound, using a tone that carried layers of meaning. He acknowledges Shadow as pack leader of the Bridge Builders, Sarah translated from Shadow's interpretation. It's a title of enormous respect in Zephyrian culture, reserved for those who unite separated tribes. Admiral Morrison recognized the significance immediately. If a Zephyrian High Commander formally acknowledges Shadow's authority in interspecies matters, it establishes legal precedent for creature autonomy under Zephyrian law. The implications were staggering. Not only would it legitimize the creatures' role as neutral arbitrators, but it would establish them as independent entities with rights under both human and Zephyrian legal systems. Shadow seemed to understand the importance of the moment. It moved to the center of the room and began a complex vocalization that drew the attention of every creature in the facility. One by one, the other species representatives joined in, creating a harmony of sounds that somehow conveyed concepts beyond what any single voice could express. "They're making a formal declaration, Dr." Vasquez realized, her instruments detecting sophisticated patterns in the combined vocalizations. This isn't just translation, it's an interspecies treaty being negotiated in real time. The human and Zephyrian delegates listened in fascination as the creatures laid out terms for their role as neutral arbitrators. They proposed establishment of joint monitoring stations throughout disputed territories, staffed by creatures with full authority to enforce environmental and security agreements. They outlined protocols for peaceful dispute resolution and emergency procedures for preventing conflicts from escalating to violence. Most remarkably, they proposed a gradual expansion of interspecies cooperation, starting with limited joint ventures and growing toward full partnership as trust developed between human and Zephyrian communities. "It's brilliant," Admiral Morrison said quietly. "They're not trying to solve everything at once, they're creating a framework for gradual integration." High Commander Vextar spoke again, and this time his tone carried clear approval. Shadow's translation conveyed formal acceptance of the creature's proposal, along with agreement to begin implementation immediately in the Kepler system as a test case. The human delegation voted unanimously to accept the framework. Within hours, legal teams from both species were working with creature advisors to draft formal documents establishing the first interspecies arbitration authority. That evening, Sarah found Shadow on the observation deck where the relationship had begun months earlier. The creature was watching stars through the reinforced windows, its posture peaceful and contemplative. "Thinking about home?" Sarah asked, settling beside the large shadow hound. Shadow made a sound that conveyed complex emotions, nostalgia for places it had known, but also contentment with where it found itself now. It gestured toward the stars, then toward the activity visible through the deck's internal windows where creatures and humans continued working together on implementation details. "This is home now," Sarah interpreted. "All of this." She understood the feeling. Over the past months, the Defiance had become something unprecedented, a truly integrated community where species barriers had given way to genuine friendship and cooperation. Children from both species played together in the recreation areas. Scientists collaborated on projects that pushed the boundaries of what either species had thought possible. Artists created works that combined aesthetic traditions in ways that created entirely new forms of beauty. The peace talks were just the beginning, Sarah realized. What we're really building is a new kind of civilization. Shadow made an affirmative sound and touched her shoulder gently with one massive paw. The gesture had become their private communication, a way of expressing friendship that needed no translation. Through the observation windows, they could see the lights of approaching ships. The first mixed crews were arriving to begin joint operations in the Kepler system, with creature arbitrators aboard to ensure smooth cooperation. Other lights in the distance marked the construction of humanity's first interspecies starbase, where the arbitration authority would be permanently housed. The facility was being designed by joint teams using creature-mediated communication, resulting in architecture that seemed to flow like living art while incorporating the practical needs of multiple species. "What do you think happens next?" Sarah asked. Shadow's response was longer and more complex than usual, filled with concepts that pushed the boundaries of their developing communication system. But the core message was clear: this was only the beginning. The creatures had experienced life under both tyranny and freedom, and they intended to use that knowledge to help build something better than either species had imagined alone. The observation deck's communication system activated, announcing the arrival of the first interspecies colonist ships. Families from both human and Zephyrian worlds, volunteers ready to begin life in truly integrated communities overseen by creature arbitrators. Pack Leader Shadow, report to Communications Center, came the announcement. The advanced colony teams are requesting translation services for final settlement protocols. Shadow rose and stretched, its movements showing none of the pain and hesitation that had marked its early days aboard the Defiance. The creature was healthy, confident, and purposeful, everything it had been designed to be, but in service of peace rather than war. "Go ahead," Sarah said. "Your people are waiting." Shadow made one final sound before leaving a complex vocalization that conveyed gratitude, affection, and determination. It was the sound of a being that had found its true purpose, and was ready to help others find theirs as well. Watching through the observation windows as the first interspecies transport docked with the Defiance, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that desperate day at the mining station. A single act of compassion toward an abandoned creature had grown into something that might reshape the galaxy. The war between humans and Zephyrians was officially ending, replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history, a truly cooperative interspecies civilization guided by beings who understood the best of both worlds. Shadow had been rescued as a victim of war, but had become an architect of peace. And, perhaps, Sarah thought as she watched the mixed crews beginning their work together, that transformation from victim to leader was the most human thing of all.